Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 30-Minute Gospel. My name is Chris, and I'll be your host as we open and study the Bible together. I'll be reading from the King James Version, but you can feel free to read whichever translation that best suits you. I would just recommend that you have a version that does not delete verses from God's holy word. Each video will be a biblical teaching of 30 minutes or less. My material is completely 100% free, so you can share these videos with family members, co-workers, friends, or anyone you know who either needs to hear the Word of God or wants to study it in a casual setting. The gospel is free to all, so I will not accept any donations, gifts, or beg viewers for money. Please give to your local church or a Christian organization of your choosing. You can reach out to me with questions or comments at 30minutegospel@gmail.com, but please keep your message respectful and cordial. Well, welcome again to another episode of the 30-Minute Gospel. We've been in the midst of a study. We've already done 3 videos on Romans chapter 9, and I've already discussed about how the people in the Reformed community misinterpret Romans 9 to mention to kind of further their biblical teaching of how God selected certain people to be saved and certain ones not to be saved. But the problem with that is that it is not, Romans 9 has nothing to do with that. We've made that abundantly clear. Paul in Romans 9, 10, and 11 spends all 3 chapters talking about the nation of Israel. He talks about the nation of Israel, okay, many, many times. It's about the nation. It's not about individual salvation. I think I've repeated that probably 100 times in the 3 videos. I'm repeating it again. It is not about individual salvation. It is about the nation of Israel, what their position is now that the church has basically overtaken them. Basically, God is now working through the church, okay, during the age of grace to bring people to Christ, to display God's glory, these sorts of things. Where in the ancient times, he used the nation of Israel. Okay, now he's using them. But the nation of Israel still has a place, because when the church is raptured up, God will then use them again with the 144,000 to evangelize and be his witnesses on the earth again. So that's why Paul says eventually all Israel will be saved. And I think it's in Romans 11:25, all Israel will be saved. That's what he's saying. So that's what he's talking about there. Does that make sense? Okay, so he's dealing with the nation of Israel. Okay, that's what we're talking about. God is showing mercy unto all. That's what we were talking about last time. We talked about in Romans chapter 9, verse 16, 17, how it says you cannot work your way or you cannot will your way. And what I meant by will is that you can't just say, I want to be saved. I want to be saved. God, save me. I want to be saved. You can't do that. You have to go through God's program. Okay? And what it's saying here is that God is showing, it says God can't, you can't work or will your way. It's God who shows mercy. If God didn't show mercy through Jesus Christ or through working through the nation of Israel, which God is a merciful God, slow to anger, abounding in love, it says that hundreds of times throughout the text in the Old Testament and the New Testament, that he is a merciful God. If he didn't show mercy at all, you couldn't just be standing around going, God, save me. That's not the way it works. You can't will yourself into his presence. Okay? Doesn't mean, see, a lot of the Calvinists will use that and say, well, that means that you can't believe at all. No, that's not what it's talking about. It's like you can't will. You have to go through his program. God has mercy on all right now. So therefore, he's having mercy on all men. He's drawing all men unto himself, as it says in John 12:32. Okay, it says he's drawing all men unto him. And so what you can't just will yourself, just like Cornelius was giving alms to the poor. He was praying to God. He was doing these things. He's trying to will himself. No, you have to go through the program. And since God is having mercy on all, he's having mercy on Cornelius or anybody else who wants to come in. Okay, does that make sense? It does not say that nobody will want to be saved. It's just that you have to go through his program. Okay, that's the way they interpret it, but it's incorrect. Okay, now when it was talking about this, we noticed here it says, we were there. For the scripture say, no, this is verse 17. It says, "For the scripture saith unto Pharaoh," this is where we left off last time, "Even for this same purpose have I raised thee up, that I might show my power in thee, and that my name might be declared throughout all the earth. Therefore he hath mercy on whom he hath mercy, and whom he will he hardeneth." Now this verse, if you understand the tulip and the 5 points of Calvinism, this verse disproves total depravity. Okay, so they'll use this verse and say, "See, God is hardening people, but he's showing mercy on some, but hardening others." Well, the thing is why would he need to harden somebody who can't believe the gospel anyway? According to your thing, they believe in total depravity. It's like, well, really, as one commentator said, they believe in singular depravity. They don't believe in total depravity. The only thing they believe you can't do is believe the gospel. That's the only thing you can save people from burning buildings. You can give money to the poor. You can be a faithful husband and or a faithful wife, but you just can't believe the gospel. So if God is hardening you, he wouldn't need to harden you unless there was an opportunity for you to believe. Okay? So obviously you can believe. Otherwise God wouldn't need to harden you. This verse disproves total depravity. But anyway, God still gave, we talked about that last time, God still gave Pharaoh a chance though in Exodus chapter 5. Now I want you to notice what it says. It says in Exodus 4:21, if you go over there, if you go to Exodus 4:21, this is where God first says that he is going to harden Pharaoh's heart. Okay? All right. In verse 21 it says, "And the Lord said unto Moses, When thou goest to return into Egypt, see that thou do all those wonders before Pharaoh, which I have put in thine hand. But I will harden his heart, that he shall not let the people go." Now I want you to notice that. He will harden his heart after it says, "See that thou do all these wonders before Pharaoh, which I have put in thine hand. But I will harden his heart." See, he didn't say, "And the Lord said unto Moses, When you go to Egypt, I will harden the Pharaoh's heart, and then you do these things." No, he said it's done after. Okay? It's done after. It does not say he's hardening his heart right now. Okay? He's not hardening it right now. God hardens it after these wonders. Okay, after the showing of these wonders. It does not say he's doing it now. Okay, right as Moses is speaking. He says, "I will." It's not that "I have." It says, "I will." That's a future tense, which means that Pharaoh's heart wasn't hardened yet. Which means he hardened him for a reason, because he didn't believe. And he gave him that opportunity. I said in Exodus chapter 5 verse 1, when he was talking that, he said in chapter 5 verses, when Moses spoke to him in verse 1 and verse 2, it says, "And Pharaoh said, Who is this Lord, that I should obey his voice to let Israel go? I know not the Lord, neither will I let Israel go." So God's giving him opportunity. He's presented him, "Hey, this is God." And he chose not. He didn't say, "Well, tell me more about this God. Tell me more about him." He didn't. Okay? And it says nothing in there that God had hardened his heart yet. Some of them will argue, well, that means that God had already hardened his heart. It doesn't say that. You're assuming that. Okay? He knew that Pharaoh would be stubborn and not follow the commands given to him by Moses. Now I want you to notice this. As I said in the last video, we left on this. Pharaoh hardened his own heart first. He did it in Exodus 8:15, Exodus 8:32, Exodus 7:13, Exodus 7:22, Exodus 8:19. He did it 5 times first before God gives the first, before God does it. In the first reference of that is Exodus 9:12. The first reference of God is hardening Pharaoh's heart is at 9:12. So by this point there's been 4, 5, 6 plagues, and Pharaoh keeps hardening his heart. Okay? He keeps hardening his heart. So Pharaoh hardened his heart first. What God did was God just finished the job. Okay, we're going to talk about that. But it says in Exodus 9:34, after 9:12, when God first hardened his heart, it says Pharaoh and his officials hardened their own hearts again. Okay, so 6 times to God's one has he hardened his heart. After Exodus 10, then it says God hardened his heart, and God hardened his heart, and God hardened his heart. It doesn't say Pharaoh did. After that point, after how many plagues? 4, 5, 6 plagues, 7 plagues. I don't know how many by this point. I'd have to look. But there's been many, many plagues that have gone on. Pharaoh had hardened his heart before God did it. Okay? God gave him the opportunity. He showed him the wonders. Look, the locusts. Look at this. Look at this thing. Look at the blood in the water. Look at the snakes eating. Pharaoh refused to believe. So God hardened his heart. Do we see this? Yes, we do. It's mentioned in the New Testament. First of all, if you mention this, if you go to the book of Romans chapter 1. You just go over a few chapters. Romans chapter 1. You guys know this. This is the very famous chapter talking about this. It says, if you start in verse 19, it says this in Romans 1. It says, because that which may be known of God is manifest in them, God hath showed it unto them. For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even this eternal power in the Godhead, so that they are without excuse. Saying you can see God in the heavens and all of this stuff in the creation tells you there's a God. So therefore, since there is a God, you should be trying to find out who this God is. Okay, it's been evident with him. Okay, that's what he says. And that's why it says Jesus is the light that lighteth every man that comes into the world. So everyone deep down knows there's a God. And they know the Bible is true. That's why Isaiah chapter 30 verse 6 says, please stop confronting us with the Holy One of Israel. That's why because everybody deep down knows that's the real God. They don't want to be confronted with him. That's why it says stop confronting us. We see it today. They want to pull down the billboards. They want to tear down crosses. They don't want the Ten Commandments because they know that's the real God, and it irritates their soul. It stings their conscience, and they don't like it. So they rather pretend he doesn't exist. Okay, so deep down everybody knows that this book is real. That's the reason why they've been trying to keep Jerusalem out of the hands of the Jews, because they know this book is real. They know the Jews have control of Jerusalem in the end times. It says the end times will come when the time of the Gentiles trampling down Jerusalem is done. They know that. They're trying to prevent the Jews from controlling it and keeping it in Gentile hands, like the Muslims or whoever. They don't want to recognize it. That's why they're doing it. Deep down, they know this book is real. But that's a side note. Okay. Verse 21 says, because that when they knew God, they glorified him not as God, neither were thankful, but became vain in their imaginations, and the foolish heart was darkened. Okay, so this is the foolish heart is darkened. All right, doesn't say God did it. All right, does this sound Pharaoh? Pharaoh's hardening his heart. Okay, professing themselves to be wise, they became fools. I'm not going to go any further with that because some of the things we're talking about, some of the people do that. It says, and changed the glory of the uncorruptible God into an image made like the corruptible man, and the birds, and the four-footed beasts, and the creeping things. Wherefore God also gave them up to uncleanness through lust of their own hearts, to dishonor their own bodies between themselves, who changed the truth. And y'all all know this. It says, and then verse 26, for this cause God gave them up to vile affections, for even their women did change. So you can see that God has given them up. What is he doing? He's hardening their hearts at this point. Okay? He's hardening their hearts. They've already hardened. They've darkened their hearts. It doesn't say God did it. It says after they've done all this, then God turns them over. That's what he did to Pharaoh. Pharaoh kept hardening his heart, darkening, so God handed him over to a depraved mind, to their vile affections is what he did. He handed him over, and that's his judgment. Okay. There's also 1 Timothy 4:2 talks about this as well. So if you go over to 1 Timothy 4:2 says, we'll start in verse 1. It says, now the Spirit speaketh expressly that in the latter times some shall depart from the faith, giving heed to the seducing spirits and doctrines of devils. Verse 2, speaking lies in the hypocrisy, having their conscience seared with a hot iron. See, conscience seared with a hot iron. That's what Pharaoh did. That's what Romans 1 is talking about. They're searing themselves with a hot iron. They're not responding. Their hearts, they have hardened their hearts to the point God turns them over. There comes a point where you will not hear it anymore. God will leave you alone. He departs from you. The light that lighteth every man is gone, and there's no turning back at that point. That's what happened with Pharaoh. Now you're under God's judgment. Okay, does that make sense? So when they said, when it says that whom he wills he has mercy, and whom he hardens, he's hardening those that have already hardened their heart. That's what he's talking about. All right, how does this play out? Well, it's talking about the nation of Israel, because remember, this is not about individual salvation. Okay, he's using Pharaoh as an example to extrapolate that on the entire nation. What's happened is God has hardened, it says he has hardened them in part, or blinded them in part, so that the fullness of the Gentiles can come in. Okay, so just like Pharaoh was hardened because he was given all of, the Jewish people were given all this evidence of Jesus. You see, they were given all this evidence of Jesus, of who he was. He appeared before them. He gave them their teachings. He did all those miracles. He was raised from the dead. The people are preaching his word. You see, they're preaching what he taught. These sorts of things. It was presented to him, just like the 10 plagues were presented before Pharaoh. But the vast majority of Jewish people hardened their hearts. So what has God done? He has hardened them, because the nation refuses to believe as a whole, not individual Jews, but the nation as a whole has been blinded in part, so that now he's turning to Gentiles. So now he has mercy on all people. He still has mercy on the Jewish people. What does it mean they've been blinded? I explained that. It doesn't mean they can't believe. No, it does not. What it means is it's more difficult for them to believe. It's harder for them to believe because of their traditions, their ethnicity, these sorts of things that have gone on. There's been tension between Christians and Jews, throughout the centuries, but it's harder for them to believe. Okay, it's not to say that they can't believe, it's just harder for them to. You have to do a lot more convincing with them, okay, than you would any other Jew. But I think there's a hardening it's hard for people that are really stuck in a lot of those, not just Jews, but like any Hindu person, Muslim people, that sort of harsh, that sort of those very large religions, it's hard to break away from them. So it takes more. It takes a lot more effort to do it. That's what he's talking about. So if you look at Pharaoh, Pharaoh saw all the miracles, but yet he hardened his heart, so then God hardened him. Okay, to the point where he didn't believe. Well, the Jews have had chance after chance after chance after chance after chance to believe. At this point, they refused, so God has hardened their heart, so he can have mercy on everybody else. All right, doesn't mean they can't believe, but they've been hardened. Does that make sense? So that's the thing, God, that he's making a point of this. God didn't just decide, Jews, your heart's going to be hardened. Pharaoh, your heart's going to be hardened. Okay? He didn't say that. He said, he gave them an opportunity. They had all those wonders presented in front of him, and yet he didn't believe. He hardened his own heart. So does that make sense? I hope everyone understands that. That's what it's talking about. So it says in verse 17, I want you to notice that it says, even for this same purpose have I raised thee up. It didn't say he created him for this. He said he raised him up. Okay? So I want you to understand that. God is not creating people simply for destruction. Some Christians teach that through this. That's not what it says. It says I raised him up. What does that mean? I brought him up for this. He created Jesus. He created Jesus, or Jesus was always in existence, but Jesus' purpose was to die on the cross. He didn't create Pharaoh for that purpose. He saw what Pharaoh was doing and he raised him up because he knew he was going to harden his heart. God has foreknowledge, so he raised him up. He didn't create him. He didn't create him for that purpose. He raised him up for that purpose. Okay? You got to really pay attention to what it says. I know what some people want to believe it says, but that's not what it says. It says he raised him up, meaning he brought him up for that. Okay, it's it's just like any purpose. Like he raised Judas up, you know, to be his disciple, even though he raised him up. He didn't create Judas for that purpose to send him to hell, but he raised him up because he knew his heart. Okay, so that's an example of what he's saying. So since God knew Pharaoh would do this, God used him to display his power. He did not create Pharaoh to accomplish this. It says he raised him up. He used him because he knew what his heart was, and of course he knew the future. So that's what it says. God does not create people to be used only for evil and to throw them in hell. Okay, that's he didn't do that. So let's look at Romans chapter 2 just for a second. 2 verse 11 says this. It says, for there is no respect of persons of God for God with God. It also says that in Acts 10:34. So if God is selecting certain people to be saved while not selecting others, he's being a respecter of persons. He's not offering the same deal to everybody. He's respecting people. And it says it several times throughout that God shows what does respecter mean? Showing favoritism. If you believe he's selecting certain people to be saved while condemning others out of this, however you want to say it, passing over them or whatever, he's showing favoritism. Okay. Now, when it comes to service, God will show favoritism when it comes to service because he's given certain people certain gifts. Okay? But with the gospel of salvation, he's given it to everybody. He has mercy on all. He's not a respecter of persons. Okay? God has mercy on all, as it says Romans 11:32. Paul is answering the question as to why God is showing mercy now on the Gentiles. That's what it is. He's showing mercy on the Gentiles, and whom he hardens, he hardens. Well, that's true, but every time we've ever seen it, those he hardens are people that have already hardened their heart. Like we said, Pharaoh hardened his heart. So therefore, he's comparing Pharaoh, using Pharaoh as an example of the entire Jewish nation and how they've hardened their hearts, even though they were presented with the gospel. They were given many, many opportunities. Okay, I hope that makes sense. Okay, starting in verse 19 through 21. Okay, here we go. That will say then unto me, why doth he yet find fault? For who hath resisted his will? Nay, but, O man, who art thou that repliest against God? Shall the thing formed say to him that formed it, why hast thou made me thus? Hath not the potter power over the clay of the same lump to make one vessel of honor and another unto dishonor? Okay, so here we go again. This is one of those these verses that are confusing to people to understand. They say, see, God makes some people to go to hell and some people to go to heaven. This is what he does. Okay, now let's do this. It says, in verse 19, why does God still blame us? Okay, Paul had just, now you got to realize this is continuing on from verses 16 through 18. Paul had just used Pharaoh as an example. He hardened Pharaoh's heart after giving him multiple chances to repent and after Pharaoh had hardened his own heart. We talked about that 5 times. After that point, Pharaoh could not blame God for the way he was. God turned him over to destruction. So it's not talking about somebody right now who may have, like a teenager who doesn't believe in God and saying, well, why did God make me like this that I can't believe? It's not talking about that. It's talking about the response the Jewish nation would have. Well, God has hardened us, so how can he blame us? Well, he can blame you because you have hardened your own hearts first. Okay? The Jewish people had hardened their own hearts first by not believing. He gave them every opportunity. So what's happened now is God has hardened them in part, or blinded them in part, as it says. Okay? So now the Jewish people can't turn around and say, well, why does he blame us? There's nothing we can do to reconcile our situation at this point. Yes, there comes a point in somebody's life, if they have rejected the gospel enough and God has turned them over, as it says in Romans 1, they can't come back. God didn't create them like that. He made them like that. It says, that's what it says. Why does he find fault? For who has resisted his will? Well, that's his will. His will is that you believe. And if you don't believe, his will is that he's going to turn you over. His will is that his will is for people to believe, but they have to use their free will to believe. So what happens is if they don't believe, his will then is his judgment. And what is his judgment? He turns you over to a depraved mind. And he turns you over. And at that point, when he's been turned over, this is after repeated rejection, then you can't blame him for, well, why did he make me like this? He didn't, that's what it says, is why does he found fault? Okay? It says, why does he find fault? He did find fault before. Now you're under his judgment. Do you see? Well, I'm only acting the way because he hardened my heart. Yeah, because you had hardened your heart beforehand. So he told you, if you do this, this is what's going to happen. Does that make sense? It's not talking about that God created some people and that they will never believe, and then some people they will believe. That's not what it's talking about, because he just got done talking about how Pharaoh had hardened his own, we just talked about that, how Pharaoh used Pharaoh as an example. Pharaoh hardened his own heart. And this is about the nation of Israel. It's not about individual salvation. So that the nation of Israel cannot say, well, why does he find fault in this? Why am I judged now? Because you rejected. That's the reason why. And so God has hardened your heart, just like he did with Pharaoh. Okay? Pharaoh couldn't say the same thing either. Pharaoh couldn't turn around and say, well, how can I resist your will? No, you had your opportunity. And God turned you over. That's what's going on here. Okay? So when it says that, it says, thou will then unsay to me, why doth he find fault? For who hath resisted his will? You resisted his will. His will is that none should perish, and that all should come to repentance. You resisted his will. So therefore, after so many times, God turns you over. And at that point, there is no turning back. Unless God shows mercy on you. Okay? But you had hardened your own heart first. And that's what he's talking about with the nation of Israel. They had hardened themselves. They refused to believe. And so God has now turned them over. Not the individuals, because of course individuals are different. Each individual is different, but he's turned the nation as a whole, making it hard for them to believe. They've been blinded in part. It doesn't say they've been completely blinded. It says they've been blinded in part. That's what it says if you read Romans 11:25, and I'll complete on this. It says, for I would not, brethren, that ye should not be ignorant of this mystery, lest ye should be wise in your own conceit, that blindness in part. Doesn't say in fullness. Okay, so it's blindness in part. So they have been hardened in part. Okay, we'll continue on with this. But I thank you all for tuning in today. Another wonderful study. We've got many more videos to talk about Romans 9. I just want to let y'all know, I encourage y'all to like the channel, or like the video and subscribe to the channel, so that, and send out these videos to anyone you know who needs it. I also have a message on there. It says the peace of God, or peace with God, the gospel message. Please send that out to anybody you know who may need to hear that, because of course we're coming to the end times. I've also got a Facebook page. It's called 30-Minute Gospel with Chris. You can like that and follow that. I also have an email address, 30minutegospel@gmail.com. You can definitely send me messages through there. That link is, or that email address is available in the video and description, and also in on my YouTube channel too. These videos are also available on Rumble. Okay, please, nothing vile or vulgar in those messages. I just won't read them. Thank you again, and for everyone for tuning in. And I will leave you with this. Remember, just as Theodore Roosevelt once said, a thorough knowledge of the Bible is worth more than a college education. God bless you all.